He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
War has broken out in the Middle East, and New Zealanders are being told it will likely affect everything from petrol prices to the cost of food. This week, our special episode of No Stupid Questions is about how you might expect it to affect you and the New Zealand economy more generally. I'm Susan Edmonds, I'm RNZ's money correspondent. I'm joined by Justin Gregory.
How you doing, folks? Yep, bit of a different program this time, bit of a different mood to it.
Yes, we should start by acknowledging that we are in a very fortunate position that, for most of us, the biggest impact here is financial. We're not physically in danger, and obviously our thoughts are with those for whom that's not the case.
Yeah, agreed. And with all that in mind, Susan, where are we here in New Zealand likely to see the impact of this conflict the most?
Well, one of the biggest places and where we're seeing it first so far is at the petrol station. We've already seen fuel prices start to lift quite a bit as the conflict has pushed up the price of oil. How high they go is a bit of an it depends. The longer it goes on, potentially the worse it is for petrol prices, as with all of these things really. Just after Donald Trump told us he thinks the war is pretty much done, apart from wanting to take over the Strait of Hormuz, which, you know, is probably no small thing, oil prices have actually dropped a bit. So whether that continues depends on how done we really are. I chatted to the AA's petrol price guru Terry Collins about how high he thinks it might go.
What happens is these geopolitical events, they take time to readjust the supply chains.
Okay.
There's many things at play right now. All I know is I'm confident. I bought some fuel on Monday knowing that I wasn't going to get it cheaper. And I can't see it getting cheaper in March.
91 is increasing and is getting past $3 in some parts of the country.
Yikes. And potentially oil prices could double, yeah?
Yeah, so oil prices started the year at about US $60, and they've basically doubled on that already, although it is moving around quite a lot. And what's frustrating for a lot of people, judging by my emails, is that when the oil price goes up, we tend to see petrol prices rise quite quickly. But there's a perception that when they fall, they come through more slowly because the petrol companies say, oh, you know, we bought it at the higher price and so we have to sell it at the higher price.
I mean, that must be somewhat true, isn't it?
Yeah, they do have to sell the stock they bought at the higher price, but conversely, they should also be sheltered from the increase by stock they bought at a lower price. And I think we've got about 3 weeks' worth on shore already. It's been noted by the Commerce Commission that prices go up more quickly than they come down. This is called rocket and feather pricing. And we do end up getting the movement both ways, though, but it's slower coming down.
Kind of related to that is the wider inflation question, right? Because the cost of fuel can have more far-reaching effects than just filling up your car at the petrol pump.
Yes, this is really important, I think. Usually the Reserve Bank doesn't worry too much about fuel prices going up because even when they're rising, if you're spending more to fill up your car, then you have less to spend elsewhere. So it's not really inflationary. But there is another impact because everything that relies on fuel to make it or get it places where we buy it could be going to get more expensive. And, you know, most stuff in New Zealand relies on fuel in one way or another. And we've already had retailers warning that prices could go up for lots of things.
And we're talking about ordinary household stuff here, staples, food, clothes, that kind of thing?
Yes, particularly food, but pretty much everything can be affected. What I'm hearing is that businesses are less able or maybe willing to cut costs now. So if their bills are higher, then they're more likely to pass that on to customers.
Yeah, fair enough. But why are businesses less able to cut costs now?
I think it's the experience of the past few years. I think a lot of businesses have cut their costs as much as they could, so there isn't anything left to trim. And we've also been through this experience of prices rising, so it's not so scary anymore as it might have been maybe 10 years ago. I think businesses used to be really worried that if they put up their prices, they'd lose market share, but now it's something that happens, so it's more likely that any cost increases do get passed on to the final consumer, which is us.
Okay, understood. The acceptability window has shifted.
That's right. But the problem is inflation was already getting a little bit uncomfortable for the Reserve Bank, and now we've potentially got more coming through. So I talked to Infometrics Chief Executive Brad Olsen about this.
With high diesel, that's sort of more of an influence on, the commercial sector directly, having to move goods around the country, being able to, operate machinery and everything else, those costs go up. So the other piece that we're watching is, one, how persistent and long-term is the current conflict in the Middle East, and two, what is those higher potential operating costs for commercial businesses due to overall inflationary pressures in the economy. If you've got if you've got transport costs, across the board that have gone up, if businesses start to pass on those higher operating costs on in their prices, that's where there would be some worry. I mean, even at the moment, the whole aim to get inflation back, within the band, and then sort of, driving down towards 2%, that goal will likely have to be pushed out because of this increase in oil prices.
We don't want the Reserve Bank to get worried and start putting interest rates back up again, thanks very much. That's sort of the last thing we need right now when we're only just shaking off the impact of high interest rates that were used to stamp out the post-COVID boom.
We're just starting to feel confident again.
That's right. That's right. I think people are so wary of rising interest rates now that it would actually be quite bad if they shot up quickly again. But people have been telling me, economists, people who know these things, that overall, actually, all of this will be negative for the economy, and that negativity is likely to be a bigger factor than the inflation for the Reserve Bank. So rates probably won't go up. But that's good news for borrowers, I guess, but not for a good reason.
What about KiwiSaver, though? I mean, quite early on there were warnings that this could be bad for our KiwiSaver accounts. Still true?
Yeah, markets don't like conflict and uncertainty, and the longer this goes on, the more oil prices increase, the more wary markets get. Kernel founder Dean Anderson says it's starting to show up in more volatility now, although Morningstar tells me overall, KiwiSaver funds are still broadly flattish.
So ultimately what's happening is the markets are trying to determine how big and for how long this war will continue. Ultimately all of this is coming down to oil. And oil is the lifeblood of the global economy. And with 20% of that supply now effectively cut out, it's sort of the wait and see to see how quickly that may open up. And so as markets are trying to guess as to this thing dragging on and how long it may continue, that fear flows through to changes in share prices.
He says investors are getting better at dealing with disruption because we've had a bit of it lately. COVID, tariffs, Ukraine, on it goes.
On it goes. So what's the message for people who are worried about their KiwiSavers? What should they do?
You might see your balance drop, and that is generally okay. If you've got a few years until you need the money, you don't need to worry about market movements. Just tell yourself that the manager might be snapping up bargains for you.
Tell yourself that.
And
Just
Dean's
keep
advice,
telling yourself that. Keep saying.
That's right. They're on
hoovering
sale.
up the bargains for you.
That's right. Dean's advice is not to log in if you don't have to.
Yes.
If you need the money sooner, though, you should already be in a less risky fund, which means your balance shouldn't be moving as much anyway.
Okay, but what kind of time frame are we talking about here, and for the different types of funds?
So there's no hard and fast rule, but in general, if you need your money in the next 3 years, I'd be staying quite conservative. If it's maybe 10 years until you need it, then you could be in a balanced fund, although if it's to the longer end of 10 years, you could make a case for a bit more risk, I think. And if it's more than 10 years, you can usually afford to get into growth or even high growth funds.
What if, perfect timing and all that, what if you're just realising now that you're in the wrong fund?
Yeah, if you really truly are in the wrong fund and you need your money now, you probably are best to just shift it because you don't know what's going to happen. But if you can afford to hang on, it's better to stay put and not lock in any losses.
On a different note, there's travel. People are having their flights cancelled and their trip plans upended. What's going on? What can they do?
Well, apparently there are 124 flights a month between New Zealand and Dubai.
That's surprising. That's so many.
I thought that was quite a lot.
Yeah.
It's the 7th largest long-haul flight destination from New Zealand. So when that airspace closes or flights are cancelled, that is a big disruption. Even if your flight isn't actually cancelled, you might be wary about travelling. I spoke to Jessica Walker at Consumer about what rights you might have as a traveller. She says there are lots of variables going on here, but a good place to start is to check with your airline or travel agent and find out what's going on. Make sure you've registered your contact details, all that sort of thing. If you've got a fully refundable airfare, you're probably going to be totally fine. But if not, then it gets a bit trickier.
If you don't have a refundable fare, and let's be honest, that's probably most of us, in the end of a delay, then you could be entitled to a credit or rebooking. So to get you to your destination by another way.
Okay.
Any extra costs that you're going to incur because of this delay are probably not going to be covered by the airline. Now, the reason for that is because this conflict is outside of the airline's control and is not covered by the Montreal Convention. Now, the Montreal Convention is a treaty that's been adopted by about 150 countries, and that governs airlines' liability for international carriage of people and goods. And depending on where you're travelling to and from, depends on whether you've got coverage of the Montreal Convention, But what we're saying in this instance is because it's conflict, it's highly likely that you're not going to be covered. And so I'd say it's highly likely that people caught up in this, they're going to have out-of-pocket expenses because of delays and cancellations that it's highly unlikely you're going to be able to claim back. Now, in the event of a cancellation, we would say that arguably the airline has failed to provide the service that you've paid for. So we think in this instance, you're well within your rights to ask for a refund for your fare. And if you're part way through a fare, so say you might have a 2-leg trip, especially from this part of the world, then if you are disrupted part way through your journey, then you'd be entitled to ask for a refund for the unused portion of your ticket. So it is quite a complicated situation.
She's also warning that people taking credits from airlines could end up not being able to buy the same flight with them if the cost of travel increases, because aviation fuel prices have obviously skyrocketed, so fares are likely to rise. We've already seen Air New Zealand warn about that.
Yeah, but insurance is going to come to the rescue, right? Riding over the hill, white horse, all that stuff?
Well, probably not. The Insurance and Financial Services Ombudsman, Karen Stevens, told me that people need to be careful because most insurance policies don't cover for things that happen because of the outbreak of war. They also don't help if you've just changed your mind about travelling. So it's really important to check what you're covered for before you go ahead and cancel anything.
So if you've got this far, your head might be reeling, wondering what all this means. So we'll get a little bit of help on that one.
We've got incoming business editor Corin Dan joining us now to help us out. The food prices thing is really hard for households, right? Because you can only cut down so much, and I feel like people have already done that.
Yeah, I mean, we've spent far too long having to go through all the stories of how to save there and save this, save that. I mean, the part of the problem with, I suppose, with petrol is that it's not very... A lot of people just have to drive still. They've still got to get to work. They've still got to use their car, and they're going to have to cut back in other areas. But, it's getting harder and harder, and I suppose... with meat, those sort of core staples of meat and dairy just still remain very elevated. And for many households, where mince used to be just a bog standard, that was a regular meal at the flat when I was a student. Nowadays, mince is practically a delicacy.
Yeah, that's right. I've seen people talking about having to mix it with beans and things to make it work. Yeah.
Totally, lentils.
Yeah, that's right. Do you have a view on where interest rates might go? I've had economists tell me both ways, that the Reserve Bank might think that it needs to stamp down on the inflation and that it might think the economy's in dire straits, it needs to ease up on the interest rates.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because if we're now seeing forecasts that inflation, rather than drop down under that 3% band, might hover up there for longer, that will be making the Reserve Bank nervous. We've got a relatively new Reserve Bank governor that will be wanting to stake her credentials on getting that inflation target sorted. The question will be is how long this war goes for and how much of a damaging effect it has on growth and the prospects for the overall New Zealand economy. And then at which point, how much can the Reserve Bank look through what is hopefully going to be a fairly short to medium-term spike in energy costs that has to flow through the New Zealand economy. And I'm sure there will be some thinking around whether they can look through that and argue the case that this will work its way through the system, but that overall there's perhaps they can leave things where they are because it's pretty finely balanced. The risk is the real problem, the fear is that we get the double whammy, the stagflation, where they still have to raise rates, but we just don't have the growth. And that's just a nightmare scenario, which hopefully we don't end up in. I guess the question is, I just can't see how, it seems kind of unbelievable, isn't it, that they might be bringing forward a rate hike with so much uncertainty hanging over the New Zealand economy. And that is probably overall my biggest worry, is that what we saw with the tariff, the Liberation Day tariff episode, was just the sheer uncertainty that it caused. And then for a whole quarter, it felt like the brakes get slammed on the recovery, on the growth, because people are worried about decisions. Are they hiring? Are they firing? Are they investing? Are they moving money around? Even if it's just at the margins, it's just taking that little bit of energy out of the New Zealand recovery, which we cannot afford at this time. We need every bit of that momentum. So I would worry that the momentum gets stalled just when things are starting to get going because of that uncertainty. So, yeah, I don't envy the Reserve Bank. They've got a nightmare task ahead. And, they can look through inflation. There are times when it stays outside the band and for good reasons. They've got a medium-term horizon, haven't they? But,
that's right.
They've sort of staked their credentials too on getting it back in this current particular cycle. So, yeah, it's a nightmare.
That was incoming business editor Corin Dan. No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmonds was written and presented by Susan Edmonds. That's me. Justin Gregory is the producer. The engineer is William Saunders. Thanks to Terry Collins, Brad Olson, Dean Anderson, Jessica Walker and Karen Stevens for their answers. Big thanks to RNZ's Corin Dan for his expert insight. Follow and listen to No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmonds on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or any podcast app so you don't miss an episode. Stay safe, everyone.